In the dry, windswept edges of Mesquite Bluff, Colt Danner just wanted a quiet life, mending fences, tending cattle, and staying out of folks' business. But one dusk, near his line shack, he finds something he never expected. A barefoot woman, bruised and silent, clutching a tarnished locket like it was the last piece of herself. She don't speak, don't even flinch. But something in her eyes tells Colt there's a storm buried deep. As he gives her shelter, trouble starts circling like buzzards. Malcolm Vire, a smooth-talking land baron, rolls into town and lays claim to a neighboring homestead, calling it unowned. But the woman, though she can't find the words, stares at that land like it once belonged to her. What happens when a forgotten soul finds a voice, and a cowboy refuses to walk away? As fences are cut, fires are set, and secrets rise from beneath the soil, Colt digs into the past and discovers a legacy wrapped in silence, shame, and strength. Because this ain't just about land, it's about memory, identity, and the quiet thunder of someone finally being seen. And just when you think you know who Eliza is, the land speaks back. If you believe even lost voices can rise strong again, hit that subscribe button and saddle up for a story you won't forget. The wind came down hard from the north that morning, rattling the tin roof on Colt Danner's line shack and carrying with it the smell of rain that never came. He'd been up since before sunup, mending the same stretch of fence he'd mended 3 times already. The land out near Mesquite Bluff had a way of breaking things slow, then all at once. As Colt poured a ladle of water into the cattle trough near the edge of his grazing line, he caught movement, just a flicker, by the brush. He turned, hand resting on his belt, not reaching for anything but ready all the same. There, half hidden behind a mesquite tree, was a woman. No hat, no shoes, dress torn and dust-caked. She looked like she'd been carved from the desert itself. She didn't speak, just stood there, breathing hard and gripping something small in her hand. "You hurt, ma'am?" Colt asked, keeping his voice calm, the kind of tone you'd use with a spooked colt. She didn't answer. He took a cautious step forward. "Ain't no one out here for miles but me and some skinny cows. You hungry?" Still nothing. He noticed now that her lip was split, and one of her ankles looked swollen. Sunburn had painted her skin a raw red, but her eyes, those were clear, alert. She wasn't lost. She was hiding. He saw the object in her hand more clearly now, a locket, tarnished and old, clutched so tight her knuckles were white. "All right," Colt said, taking off his hat and kneeling beside the trough. "You can stand there as long as you want, but I got cold biscuits inside and a clean bedroll." She hesitated, then, barely, nodded once. Colt stood and led her toward the cabin, glancing back only once to make sure she followed. She did, slow and limping, but without complaint. Inside, she took small bites of biscuit and didn't touch the beans. When he poured water into a tin cup and handed it over, she held it in both hands like it might disappear. Colt didn't push. He'd seen wariness like this before, in horses too long penned, and in folks who'd been done wrong by people who smiled too easy. She wouldn't give her name, wouldn't look him in the eye, but when he offered her the bed and said he'd take the floor, she gave the smallest of nods. That afternoon, he saddled up and rode into town for supplies. His nearest neighbor was a good 7 miles west, and the trail in between was lined with barbed wire and rumors. Mesquite Bluff wasn't much more than a church, a general store, and a watering hole with a crooked sign, but it was all they had. That's where he heard it. Malcolm Vire was in town. Land baron, smooth talker, bad news. Vire had just filed intent to claim the stretch of abandoned property adjacent to Colt's grazing permit. Said he was expanding operations. Said the land had sat empty too long. "You know the homestead I'm talking about," the sheriff told Colt as he loaded salt blocks onto his mule cart. "Old Welling place, far end of the bluff." Colt's gut went cold. He'd passed that crumbling chimney for years, never thought much of it. But now... When he got back to the cabin, the woman was sitting on the porch, the locket open in her lap. She wasn't crying, just staring out across the sagebrush flats toward the place Vire had named. Colt stepped beside her. "That where you're from?" She didn't answer. but her fingers clenched tighter around the locket. He didn't ask again. Some answers come slow. Others are etched in silence. And Colt Danner had never been one to walk away from something just 'cause it looked broken. That night, as the stars came out, he sat on the steps, listening to the wind move through the sage, and the quiet breath of the woman inside, who didn't yet know she wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, Colt Danner stepped outside with a mug of coffee in one hand and his boots in the other. The dawn sun cast long gold streaks across Mesquite Bluff, but something in the air felt off, too quiet, too still. The cattle should have been lowing by now, ready for water. Instead, the pasture was empty. His stomach sank. He set down the coffee and pulled on his boots quick. With a glance back toward the cabin, where the woman still lay resting under his patched quilt, Colt mounted up and rode the fence line. It didn't take long to find the trouble. Half his herd was gone. The rest scattered, panicked, with fresh cuts along their flanks where they'd pushed through broken wire. Someone had slashed the fencing in 2 spots, clean, fast, like they'd done it before. Near the south gate, Colt found hoof prints, fresh ones, at least 3 riders. One wore narrow shoes with spurred heels, not cowhands. Hired men. He bent down, brushing the dirt beside the tracks. A boot print, pointed toe, Cuban heel. Colt knew that shape, Malcolm Vyer's style. By the time he got back, the woman was awake, sitting by the stove with a blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes tracked him as he walked in, but she didn't speak. Still, there was a flicker of something new in her face. Worry, maybe, or understanding. "They cut the fence," Colt said, not expecting a reply. "Ran off my herd. Took my irons, too." She flinched at that, just slightly. Colt crouched by the hearth. "I don't know what you've been through, miss, but something tells me it's tied to that stretch of land across the bluff. Vyer's sniffing around like he already owns it." She gripped the locket. That was enough for Colt, for now. Later that day, he rode into Mesquite Bluff to report the rustling. The sheriff, a weary man named Billers, who always looked like he was 5 minutes from retirement, scratched his head and sighed. "Unless you saw him do it," he said, "ain't much I can prove. And about that land next door, as far as records go, it's unclaimed. Official word is the Welling family line ended sometime round 87. Fire at the depot took most of them early land grants. County can't find a title, and Vyer's got his paperwork in order." "That land was lived on," Colt said flatly. "There's still a chimney standing." Billers shrugged. "A chimney don't sign a deed." Colt left the office more frustrated than he'd admit. If Vyer's men were riding over property lines with impunity, and the town backed him 'cause of his money, Colt knew he couldn't count on the law to fix it. Back at the shack, dusk had already begun to paint the world in blue. He unsaddled his mare and stepped onto the porch. The woman was waiting, her hair braided back now, eyes a little less distant. "I've been thinking," he said quietly. "If that land is tied to you, maybe to who you were, we'll find a way to prove it." She didn't reply, just turned and walked back inside. That night, Colt lit the lantern and shifted a loose board beneath the hearth where he kept his old rifle and a few valuables. But something else was there now. A rusted tin box, flat, with a faded leather hinge. He hadn't seen it before. He set it on the table. The woman stepped closer, arms crossed tight. "You recognize this?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out and opened it. Inside was a folded piece of yellowed parchment, a hand-drawn map with faded ink, rough boundary lines, and a mark shaped like a brand. Below it, a name written in shaky cursive. She stared at it a long while, eyes wide. Then, for the first time, she looked at Colt full on, and nodded. The map was old, edges curled and smudged with soot, but its ink held. A jagged black line traced a familiar bluff, then curved along a dry creek bed before ending in a hand-drawn box labeled Welling Homestead. At the center was a brand, a crooked W nestled inside a horseshoe. Colt Danner leaned over the table, jaw tight. "That mark," he murmured. "It's the same as your locket." The woman, still unnamed, opened the silver locket in her palm. Inside, the same W brand was etched behind a faded miniature portrait. A man and a girl, seated on a porch. The girl looked about 10. Her hair was braided like hers was now. Colt exhaled slow. "That's you, ain't it?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Just a faint, tremulous nod. Colt rolled the map and slid it into his saddlebag. "I know someone who might remember this. Name's Gus. Lives out near Bitter Flat. He did survey work back before folks started claim jumping for profit. If there's truth to that paper, Gus'll know." She looked hesitant. "You'll be safe here," he said gently. "I'll ride back before sundown." He saddled up Lucy and rode hard across the dusty ridges, the wind tugging at his coat and the sky already threatening to storm. Bitter Flat was a good hour's ride. Gus lived alone in a shack patched with wagon canvas, his yard littered with tools that hadn't seen oil in a decade. But his memory, sharp as ever. Colt knocked once, then twice more. "Either you're bringing whiskey or bad news," Gus called from inside. "If it's both, come on in. It's Colt." Gus opened the door, squinting against the light. "You look like you rode through a sandstorm." "Feels like I did. Got a map I need you to see." Inside, Colt unrolled the parchment on Gus's barrel-top table. The old man adjusted his glasses, then let out a low whistle. "Well, That's my mark there," he said, tapping the margin. "Surveyor's stamp. I drew this back in 85, maybe 86. Back when the Welling family still ran cattle out by the bluff." "You remember them?" Gus nodded. "Charles Welling. Had a daughter. Quiet girl. Smart as a whip. Her mama passed when she was little. Folks said she used to bring preserves to town in a basket too big for her arms." Colt felt his heart catch. "This girl?" He held up the locket. Gus studied it, then nodded. "That's her, all right. Eliza." Colt's eyes widened. "She never told me her name." "She don't need to," Gus said, voice softening. "That land was hers. Far as I know, Charles filed the claim himself. Might have even scribbled it in one of the ledgers I gave the church. Couldn't get the county to take 'em proper." "That fire down at the depot?" Gus spat into a spittoon. "Just a good excuse for bad folks to rewrite boundaries. Vier's been circling that land for years. Saw him offer the sheriff a brand new saddle once. Man don't do nothing without taking something back." Colt thanked Gus, rolled up the map again, and headed home as dusk painted the hills crimson. Back at the cabin, the woman waited by the window. When Colt walked in, covered in dust and wind, she stood, nervous, expectant. "Your name," he said gently. "It's Eliza, isn't it?" She blinked, as if the sound of it cracked something loose inside her. Then she spoke, for the first time. "Yes." Just one word, but it carried everything. Grief, memory, and something fierce, like she'd just remembered what it meant to belong somewhere. Colt smiled, quiet and sure. "Then Eliza Welling, we got work to do." Because that map wasn't just a relic. It was a key. And now they knew who it belonged to. The sky above Mesquite Bluff gleamed with a rare, generous blue as townsfolk gathered for the church picnic. Tables sagged with fried chicken, cornbread, and jars of pickled beets. Children ran wild near the creek bed, and the church bell clanged out a lazy welcome. Sundays didn't often bring joy in these parts, but today had a shine to it, even if the shine wasn't shared by everyone. Colt Danner and Eliza rode into town just before the preacher's prayer, both cleaned up but still carrying the weight of truth like a saddle that wouldn't sit right. Eliza wore a borrowed bonnet and a dress stitched from two others, neither of which matched, but she held her head steady, and Colt kept close. They didn't draw stares, they drew whispers. "That her? Thought she was dead. She used to sell peach jam right here on this green." Colt ignored the murmurs. Eliza didn't. She felt them settle like dust on her skin. By the lemonade stand, a cluster of well-dressed ladies tittered behind lace fans, and then came Malcolm Vier. He stepped up onto the hay bale stage with the mayor and preacher beside him, all smiles and polished boots. Vier presented a glossy sketch of a bell tower, holding it high for the crowd to admire. "As part of my continued investment in Mesquite Bluff," he declared, "I'm donating the materials and labor for a brand new bell tower for our church. May it ring with unity, peace, and progress." The applause that followed was loud, too loud. Colt watched Vire smile and shake hands while the mayor clapped him on the back like he was royalty. But Eliza stared at him with a look Colt hadn't seen before, calm, fixed, and dangerously clear. Colt leaned close. "You all right?" She gave a small nod. "He stood on my porch once. I remember his boots." Later, while the crowd buzzed over the donations and the kids ran tug-of-war, Eliza dropped her locket. It hit the ground near the pie table and popped open. Before Colt could reach down, Mrs. Goodwin, the mayor's wife, picked it up. Her face paled. "This locket. I know this. Eliza Welling?" Her voice shook. "You used to bring jam to my doorstep every Friday morning. You and your father lived out past the bluff." Eliza nodded slowly. "I still do." That silenced the gossip. For a moment, everyone stopped pretending not to watch. Mrs. Goodwin turned to Colt. "If she's a Welling, that land ain't unclaimed. There used to be guest books at the church from years back, names, donations, even notes scribbled by old Judge Rennick. The Welling name is in there. I'd bet on it." Colt straightened. "Where would those ledgers be?" "In the vestry basement," she said, "behind the old prayer books, if no one's tossed them out." Eliza's eyes were steady now, not panicked, determined. That night, under cover of darkness, Colt lit the lamp inside the empty church while Eliza waited near the pulpit. The old stone building creaked with age. Behind the choir rail, down the steps, and through a narrow door, the basement smelled of candle wax, paper, and old memories. Colt rummaged through boxes and shelves, fingers brushing over hymnals and frayed Bibles, until he found a stack of thick, dust-covered ledgers tied with faded blue ribbon. He brought them up and laid them on the communion table. Eliza untied the top one. The ink was faint, but the names were clear. Charles Welling, Eliza Welling. A note scribbled beside a donation. "In honor of our home and the land it stands on." Colt looked at her. "It's real. It's all here." Eliza's fingers trembled as she touched the page. "No more hiding," she whispered. They left the church in silence, the bell above them still missing. But for the first time, Eliza walked ahead, shoulders square beneath the starlight. The town clerk looked like she hadn't seen a living soul before noon in a month. But when Colt Danner stepped in with Eliza Welling at his side and a church ledger under his arm, her posture straightened fast. "We'd like to file a claim," Colt said plainly. The clerk, Miss Tilda Carver, pushed aside her cup of chicory and reached for her spectacles. "You've got a deed?" "No," Eliza said softly, "but we've got proof of heirship, boundary records, and a will." Colt slid the open ledger across the counter. Tilda's eyes moved across the page slowly, her lips pressed together. When she got to the handwritten note beside Charles Welling's name, she stopped. "That's Judge Rennick's handwriting." "And this," Colt unfolded the map Gus had confirmed, "shows the original boundaries, matches the homestead perfectly. Eliza is his daughter. She never signed anything over, and the land's still standing, barely, but it's not abandoned." Tilda nodded, slowly, reverently. "Then you're filing as heir?" Eliza glanced at Colt. Her voice barely wavered. "Yes, ma'am, I am." The clerk tapped her fingers on the desk. "That'll rile Mr. Vire." Colt's tone turned cool. "He ain't the law." "No," Tilda agreed. "But he buys a lot of it." An hour later, the paperwork was signed, notarized, and stamped. Eliza Welling's name sat atop a fresh claim filed with the Mesquite Bluff registrar, officially halting any expansion on the land until a hearing. Colt tipped his hat to Tilda. "Appreciate you doing the right thing." Tilda smiled, just barely. "You keep that girl safe." They rode home slow, wind thick with promise. But peace never comes without cost. That night, Colt awoke to the scent of smoke. "Eliza!" he shouted, already on his feet. She met him at the door, barefoot and coughing. "The barn!" Outside, flames clawed at the sky. The dry timber roof had caught fast, and the blaze roared like something wild. Colt grabbed a blanket and raced for the water barrel, but it was too late to save the barn. All he could do was keep the fire from spreading to the cabin. Behind him, Eliza bolted past, skirts hiked and eyes locked on something. "Where are you going?" he shouted. She didn't answer, just dove into the corral. A small calf, trembling and trapped in a corner, bawled out in terror. Eliza threw the wet blanket over its back, wrapped her arms around its neck, and half dragged, half pushed it toward the open gate. Colt was beside her in seconds, helping her guide it clear just as the heat surged too close. When they finally collapsed in the dust, the barn fully ablaze behind them, she looked at him with soot on her face and something fierce in her eyes. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. She shook her head. "That calf was born on my land. It stays." Colt almost smiled. Almost. The next morning, Gus arrived in his buckboard with something wrapped in oilcloth. "Brought something I think you ought to see," he said, voice grim. Inside the cabin, he unwrapped an old newspaper, yellowed and fragile. "Mesquite Bluff Herald, March 1885, Gus explained. "Kept a stack of 'em from when I was surveyin'. Found this one while cleaning out a trunk." The headline read, "Charles Welling donates grain to Widows Fund. Local settler to receive deed under expansion agreement." Below it, in smaller print, "Welling family claim officially recorded, surveyed by county, and recognized by Judge Rennick." Gus tapped the corner. "That's as solid as it gets, short of the 10 Commandments." Eliza touched the paper like it was a letter from a long-lost friend. "They tried to burn it all," she whispered, "but they didn't get everything." Colt looked out the window at the charred remains of his barn and the calf chewing contentedly beside the trough. "No," he said, "they didn't." Because proof had survived. And so had she. And now the real fight was just beginning. The morning after the fire, Mesquite Bluff wore the kind of hush that comes before a storm. Smoke still drifted from the bones of Colt's barn. Eliza stood in the pasture, eyes on the horizon, her palms blackened from ash but her spine straight as a fence post. Colt didn't need to say it. She already knew Malcolm Vire had sent that fire. But by noon, Vire made his move public. A notice, posted right in front of the general store, accused Colt of falsifying a land claim and manipulating a vulnerable woman to file under false pretenses. The paper bore the sheriff's seal. "Sheriff wants to see you," Amos, the young stable hand, said gently, handing Colt the summons. "I heard he don't aim to talk." Colt's jaw flexed, but he tipped his hat to Eliza. "I'll be back by supper." She reached out and touched his arm, light but firm. "If they lock you up, I'll make sure this town hears the truth." He gave her a wry smile. "I ain't the one who needs defendin' now." But she just shook her head. "Yes, you are." In the sheriff's office, Colt found 2 deputies waiting. Sheriff Markley, a man who wore his authority like a tailor-made coat, stood behind his desk with folded arms. "Colt Danner," he said, voice like a dry cough. "You've gone and stirred up more trouble than you know, filing claims without a deed, causing unrest. Your barn caught fire. Folks are whisperin'." "Whisperin' the wrong direction," Colt said calmly. "That fire wasn't lightning." "Maybe," Markley said, "but Vire's documents say otherwise. Court'll have to sort it. Till then, I'm holding you for fraud." Colt didn't argue. "That legal?" The sheriff opened the drawer, pulled out a warrant. "Paper says it is." By sundown, Colt sat behind iron bars, staring at cracks in the plaster wall. He'd been in tighter spots. But this one stung. Not for what it meant for him, but for Eliza. He wasn't the only one thinking about her. Back at the general store, Eliza stepped inside with her shoulders squared and the old newspaper Gus had found tucked under her arm. The room quieted as she walked to the counter and laid it down. "I'm Eliza Welling," she said, voice carrying with calm precision. "And this is my land." The storekeeper, Mr. Dodge, adjusted his glasses. "We thought you were lost." "I was," she said simply. "But I'm back, and Mr. Danner isn't the liar here." She unrolled the paper. "Charles Welling, surveyed, signed, recognized by the court. They can't erase that." Whispers turned to murmurs. Then came a question from behind the flour bin. "Why'd you leave, Eliza?" Her hands trembled for a breath. Because Malcolm Vire came once already. Said my father owed him, that if I didn't sign, I'd lose everything. I didn't sign. Next morning the house burned while I was in town for flour. Gasps rippled through the room. She looked around. I've been silent a long time. No more. By nightfall, a petition had started, led by Mrs. Goodwin and signed by 15 townsfolk. They wanted the judge to reopen Eliza's land case. They wanted Colt released. Meanwhile, in the jail, Amos appeared at Colt's cell with a rolled-up telegram in hand. "Snuck this from the wire desk," he whispered. "Came in from the state archives." Colt unrolled it slowly. Land grant 1885. Welling, Charles. Surveyed by Gus Porter. Filed with Judge Rennick. Signature intact. Copy available by courier. Colt exhaled sharply. "Well, I'll be." Amos grinned. "We get this to Judge Callahan before Vire can bury it. He won't just lose the land. He might lose the whole town." Colt looked him in the eye. "Get this to the judge by Sunday, and I swear to you, your family's land'll come back with it." Because this fight wasn't just about boundaries. It was about truth. And truth had teeth. Sunday came hot and breathless, the kind of day when sweat clung to your shirt before breakfast and the cicadas droned like an omen. But at Mesquite Bluff's town hall, folks weren't paying mind to the heat. They came in carriages, on foot, and on muleback, some out of duty, others out of curiosity. All came to see if a quiet cowboy and a woman who'd been forgotten could stand up to a man with money enough to buy the future. Judge Callahan, a stout man with a furrowed brow and sleeves rolled up to his elbows, presided from behind a warped oak table. He wasn't the kind to smile easy, but his eyes were sharp and he didn't miss much. On one side stood Malcolm Vire, flanked by 2 suited men from Carson Creek and the sheriff himself. On the other, Colt Danner, released just an hour prior thanks to the petition, and Eliza Welling, her hair pulled back tight and her shoulders squared like her father might have taught her. Callahan banged the gavel once. "Let's keep this civil." Vire rose first. "Your Honor, we're here today to prevent further obstruction of development. My team legally filed claim on unoccupied land under the Homestead Expansion Amendment. Mr. Danner and Miss Welling have presented no verified deed. Their actions have delayed a livestock initiative crucial to the region." Colt didn't speak. Not yet. He let Vire's words hang in the air like smoke. Then Judge Callahan turned to him. "Mr. Danner?" Colt stepped forward, hat in hand. "Your Honor, we filed a rightful claim based on heirship, supported by multiple historic records. This woman beside me, Eliza Welling, is the daughter of Charles Welling. The land in question was surveyed in 1885. The original church ledger confirms her family's continuous presence. We've also received a wire from the state archives, authenticated copy of the land grant filed by Judge Rennick himself." He held it up for the clerk. "The signature matches. The surveyor's stamp matches. The map matches." Callahan reviewed the telegram, then nodded for the clerk to pass it along. "This does appear legitimate." "And there's more," Colt added. "A witness, Gus Porter." Gus hobbled forward from the benches, leaning on a cane, beard tangled like barbed wire. "Surveyed that land myself. Ain't never been a question in my mind. Welling owned it. His girl here," he pointed at Eliza, "she used to bring me wild honey and say her daddy called that stretch his little patch of sky. You can't tell me Malcolm Vire has more right to it than she does." Callahan nodded again. "And the ledger?" Mrs. Goodwin rose from the second row. "It's here, Your Honor. I helped find it. My husband saw Eliza Welling bring jam to our doorstep every week till the fire. We all thought she died. Turns out she just survived." The room went still. Even Vire looked uneasy. Callahan took a deep breath. "Miss Welling, do you wish to speak?" Eliza stood slowly, clutching her locket. "I lost my name when my house burned," she said. "I lost my voice when folks chose not to remember. But I didn't lose the truth. And the truth is, this land was mine, my father's. You can't rewrite that just 'cause someone's rich enough to try." Judge Callahan sat back. "Given the volume and quality of supporting evidence, and the credible testimony, I'm placing a temporary injunction on Mr. Vire's operations pending a full investigation by the County Land Office. All expansion efforts are to cease immediately." A murmur swelled. Relief. Justice. Vindication. Vire opened his mouth, but the judge raised a hand. "Don't test me, Mr. Vire. Not today." Outside, as the crowd spilled out into the sun, Colt turned to Eliza. "You spoke your name," he said quietly. She smiled, small but steady. It was time someone heard it. Because the wind had shifted, and the silence no longer belonged to her. By Monday morning, Malcolm Vire's name had shifted from polished respect to something spat out like spoiled milk. Word of Judge Callahan's injunction spread faster than prairie fire, and with it came a change in the air, like the whole town had blinked off a long sleep. Eliza Welling's name, once buried in the ashes of her childhood home, was now spoken in the store, the saloon, even from the pulpit, not as a ghost, but as proof that the truth could still walk into town and hold its head high. Colt stood beside her on the porch, sipping black coffee as the sun rose behind Mesquite Bluff's chapel spire. "You think it'll stick?" she asked quietly, eyes on the dust trail that led toward the courthouse. "It has to," Colt replied, "and if it don't, we'll hammer it in ourselves." The door creaked behind them. Gus emerged holding a telegram. "Came through this morning," he said, handing it over. "Judge Callahan requested a full review from the county. Said the clerk confirmed the land grant and recorded survey lines from '85. He's calling for a fraud inquiry into Vire's filings." Colt raised a brow. "That's fast." Gus grunted. "Apparently your young deputy Amos hand-delivered the petition and copy of the newspaper to the regional office in Carson Creek. Kid wrote all night." Eliza blinked. "Alone?" "Didn't stop for sleep, I'm told," Gus said. "Said truth don't nap." By noon, the town square filled with townsfolk. Some came out of curiosity. Others came because they'd known for years that something wasn't right, and now they wanted to see it fixed. Vire arrived last, not in his usual polished buckboard, but in a carriage pulled by a rented mule, the fine shine of his boots dulled by red dust. His face was tight, jaw clenched like he'd bitten a sour apple and had to pretend it tasted fine. Judge Callahan stepped out from the courthouse, flanked by two men from the land office and Sheriff Markley, who, for once, wasn't smiling. "This hearing is not open for arguments," the judge began. "We've reviewed the archived grant, surveyor affidavits, and falsified declarations submitted by Mr. Vire over the past 2 years. The evidence shows deliberate tampering with boundary lines, bribery of county staff, and attempted illegal seizure of at least 4 parcels, including the Welling homestead." The crowd stiffened. Vire stepped forward, pale but defiant. "I acted within the expansion rights." "No," the judge snapped. "You acted with greed, not law, and the county won't be bullied into forgetting its own history." He nodded to the land agents, who handed the sheriff a writ. "You are hereby stripped of all current expansion permits and placed under arrest for fraud and falsification of public records." The sheriff, reluctantly but firmly, stepped behind Vire and cuffed his wrists. Gasps rose. A few cheered. One of the old ranchers from the South Bend spat in the dirt and muttered, "'Bout time." As Vire was led away, the crowd parted like a tide. Eliza stood still, watching. Her hands didn't shake. Her shoulders didn't sag. Colt looked at her. "You all right?" She nodded. "I thought I'd feel rage or relief, but I just feel clean, like I finally took off someone else's name." The judge approached them before returning inside. "Miss Welling," he said, tipping his hat, "we'll begin title reinstatement this week. The land will be returned to your name, and I suspect some of your neighbors may soon come asking about their claims too." He turned to Colt. "You, Mr. Danner, are cleared of all charges, and given your part in bringing this to light, I'd like to offer you a deputy post, if you're willing." Colt's brows rose. "Appreciate that. I'll think on it." The crowd slowly drifted away, murmuring with cautious hope. Behind them, the courthouse bell rang once. Not for a donation this time, for justice. Eliza turned to Colt. "So, what do we do now?" He smiled, warm and quiet. "We rebuild. Because what Vire tried to take wasn't just land, it was memory. And now, memory had a voice again. The first rain in weeks came soft and slow, just as the sun crested over Mesquite Bluff's eastern ridge. It wasn't a storm, just a quiet kind of blessing, the kind the land remembers. Colt Danner stood beneath the porch overhang of Eliza's rebuilt homestead, coffee mug warm in his hands, watching droplets roll down the new window panes. The boards on the house were fresh-hewn pine, still pale where the hammer marks showed. The roof, patched with help from half the town, no longer creaked when the wind passed. Across the yard, Eliza stood beneath the eaves of the barn they'd begun framing just days earlier. Her sleeves were rolled up, mud streaked the hem of her skirt, and her hair was tucked beneath a red bandana. She held a feed bucket for the calf they'd saved, a little bull now, stronger, wilder. "He won't stay still long enough to get a name," she called out. Colt chuckled, stepping off the porch. "Means he's fit for this land." The two met in the middle of the pasture where bluebells had begun to bloom again. Stubborn little things, blooming between hoof prints and fence posts like the land had decided to remember itself. "You think it'll last this time?" Eliza asked. He didn't rush the answer. "The land was always yours. Fire just made folks forget. But the way I see it, it's got your name stitched in deeper than any fence line." They walked the new perimeter together. The old boundaries, once buried or redrawn, had been remarked with fresh stone piles and hand-carved stakes. Some neighbors had stopped by that morning with cornbread, tools, or extra nails, quiet offerings to a woman they once overlooked. At the edge of the south pasture, a wooden sign leaned against a stump. The lettering had been carved by Gus, shaky but proud. Welling Danner Ranchest, 1871. Reborn, 1891. Eliza stared at it. Her hand found Colt's. "You sure?" she asked. Colt looked at her, steady and sure. "I don't want to claim what ain't mine, but I'd stand beside it, if you'll have me." She nodded once, eyes shining, not with tears, but with something rooted and real. "This land always needed a cowboy," she whispered. "I just didn't know which one." Back at the house, a knock sounded on the porch. A young girl from the general store, clutching a bundled napkin and looking half terrified, stood there with rain on her hat brim. "Miss Eliza," she squeaked. "Mama sent this, said it's lemon pie, for saying sorry." Eliza blinked, then smiled, warm and full. "Tell your mama thank you kindly." The girl nodded and ran back down the muddy path, shoes splashing as the rain began to ease. Colt and Eliza shared the pie under the eaves, forks scraping tin in the quiet. No grand speeches, no declarations, just the creak of the windmill and the steady breath of land waking up. By sundown, the clouds parted. The calf curled near the porch. The sign stood tall, shadow stretching eastward. Colt glanced sideways at her. "So what now?" Eliza smiled, eyes on the fading sky. "We work, we plant, we live." And just like that, the land breathed again, not with thunder, but with something stronger, something quiet, something true. If you believe even lost voices can rise strong again, hit that subscribe button and ride with us next time. There's always another story on the horizon.